What I love to do is introduce the right people to the right people.
I assemble the smartest people I can think of or reach out to carry that conversation, and that's exactly what I've done today.
Please give my panel a round of applause. Welcome.
Okay guys, Jay Morton here, CEO of Cambridge House, and I'm joined now by one of the stars from CBC Dragon's Den, Mr. Sunshine. Vincenzo Guzzo, how are you?
I'm all right, yourself?
I'm really good. Thanks so much for taking the time and coming on today. I'm excited to walk through a handful of topics with you. We'll cover as much as we can in the time that we have. And the first thing that I want to ask you is what's been your biggest lesson so far? You're in the cinema business, one of the industries that's been pretty disrupted by COVID. So I'm curious what your biggest lesson has been thus far, Vincenzo.
I tell you, my biggest lesson's probably been not to assume that our governments are as intelligent as us businessmen are. I mean, I think was early April. Somebody asked me how long I thought this was going to last, and I said, well, if they're smart, it's going to last 2 months, and if they're really dumb, it's going to last 4 months. We're now hitting to 12 months, so I think we know how dumb they are by now. I mean, this has been a mess. I think if you're going to have experts, you listen to them. And so if I have a public health expert, I probably listen to him or fire him and hire another guy that I can trust, right? But so, I mean, that's what I've learned. I mean, I've also learned that, it's better to pivot as soon as you see the problem and not say, okay, let's just take a 4-month vacation and we'll come back. So, there's a few little things we've learned along the way. I said to a bunch of entrepreneurs not too long ago, no matter how hard some of the government programs are, if it's free money, put the effort, go get the free money because you may need it. He says, but what if I don't need it? Take it anyway. And make sure it's an open-ended loan if it is, and you can give back the money whenever you don't need it anymore. But, I think it's very important. Cash flow is king. And I think that anybody who didn't believe that's going to believe it after these 12 months.
Yeah, 100%. I wonder if it sends a signal to entrepreneurs that is a bit of a caution, though. To your point, disruption occurs, and it's up to you to pivot. And in theory, you're on your own, but in reality, you weren't. Right? There was a pretty significant rescue effort that was put in place, and I wonder if it sent the wrong message to entrepreneurs that could have or should have acted faster, quicker, independently, and didn't. Instead, were able to rely on essentially handouts and could have learned a valuable lesson. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, one of the things that I would tell you happened, and that may have made us entrepreneurs also as complacent as the general population is because of the handouts. Everybody just said, oh, okay, so it's not going to be as bad as we think, right? The truth of the matter is, had the $2,000 not been given to everybody and had all of these supposed rescue packages not been developed, I think there would have been a bigger uproar quickly.
Yeah.
And then, more realistic things would have happened. It's a very awkward situation. I mean, I was talking to guys who are in the toilet paper industry, and believe it or not, in June, they were concerned. And I said, I don't understand what you guys are concerned about. I mean, I'll sell you my stock of toilet papers and I'll make a fortune off it. I'll sell it to you twice the price I paid for it. I'm making a killing. Their worry was that people were going to stockpile stuff and then not, and then their fourth quarter was going to be horrible.
Yeah.
Right. So they were panicking. But the general population, I thought, was pretty complacent. Everybody took it as a long vacation. I don't think people are fully understanding that any company who's made it through these last 12 months has done so at a huge cost on their balance sheet. I mean, the net tangible net worths of everybody must have taken a hit of at least anywhere between 25 and 30%. I've advised banks that call me up for advice. I've said to them, look, all of those loans you think you're getting paid back in 5 years, you can forget about it. Extend it to 10 if you really want to get paid back, because I don't think anybody will be able to pay it back in 5. And I think that's already the trend you're seeing, but we're just mostly way more indebted. It's been a great time for real estate buys because, any shopping mall and anybody who started panicking on brick and mortars dumped their stuff. So it was a buyer's market, but it's very, very scary to see how complacent everybody became in all of this. I think the only guys who really made money were the markets, right? I mean, the markets have been booming in all intents and purposes. And then, a few manipulation here and there with AMC stock and that, and everybody made a lot of money.
Yeah. Okay, and I need to clarify. I don't mean to sound insensitive when I say, these handouts were, for context, I host live events. I'm in event production, so we got completely flattened. But so you're having these conversations now with banks. We're calling you, and you're telling them exactly what I think. You're not getting this money back. And I had a conversation. I had former Prime Minister Stephen Harper on the show maybe a month and a half ago, and we were walking through the details of this because he's a guy who managed the 2008 crisis and then was essentially a spectator for the 2020 crisis. And so we were able to share notes, and he could compare and contrast the two crises. And to his point, he's like, I don't agree with the stimulus. I don't agree with the handouts, but it wasn't a recession. It was a government mandated recession in response to a pandemic. And that's the difference. So when you see instances like this, like widespread small business loans, et cetera, just being, and I appreciate it as a small business owner, but I'm a bit concerned about who's going to pick up the bill in the future. Are you, Vincenzo? Like what concerns you most, not about the present, but about the future implications of how we've dealt with this?
Well, one of the biggest problems we have is some of the handouts were done in a way that some employees don't want to come back to work until the handouts are all finished. Right. There's still people who say, look, the summer's coming around the corner. So why do I have to even, as long as the handout's till June, can we get it a little further? So I think the real problem is going to be the complacency we've created in people. But also, I think the problem that entrepreneurs are double indebted, right? So we have our own personal debt that we've acquired in our companies, but we know that the government's $400 billion deficit is going to have to be covered by somebody, right? And so we're going to have to go in there and also, I guess, have higher taxes or something's going to have to happen to cover that money. And so there's going to be added pressure, I think, on reinvesting in Quebec or in Canada. Like I've heard, we're not going to mention names, but I've heard guys who've taken such a hit to their balance sheet right now. They know they're all coming back, but now's the best time for them to do a deemed disposition and move everything to the Caribbean somewhere in a tax-free haven and walk away from Canada without any financial impact by leaving, right? So I'm very concerned on, as much as we're going to want to have a mindset of buying local, I think some of the big guys are just going to walk away from the country and say, hey, let's make a bad situation a hell of a great opportunity.
Sure.
And let me just sell, let me just do a deemed disposition. I pay my capital gain and I walk away from it. So there's a lot of that's going to happen. I'm also worried that one of the ways, if this government gets back in, that they're going to pay for this is by removing the capital gain exemptions.
Yeah.
On personal homes. I've heard it was on personal homes. And so once again, a lot of people are going to end up buying and selling their homes, selling it to their wives in some way just to crystallize the capitalization. Right. And so that's going to trigger a lot of frozen money with very little coffers coming into the government. And it may create an even longer period to get that money back. So I think we're, how can I tell you? I mean, the price of oil is going up. So that means inflation's starting to kick in and we're trying to, it's pushing at us, right? But I don't believe interest rates can go up, because if they do, I think we're going to have a hell of a problem paying interest rates. And it's going to trigger, so it's one of those awkward situations. You do want some inflation, but you don't want it too much, because if it triggers an up in the interest rates, then the other thing that we have to remember is that a lot of these loans, I got lucky. I did a real estate loan early on in COVID. So with the bond market dropping and the BAs being as low as they were, I did an amazing deal. While BAs are even lower today than they were at the beginning of the pandemic, I would be paying more interest, or give or take the same level of interest now as I was when the BAs were at 1.5. right? Now that they're a quarter point or half a point. Why? Because the banks know that they're going to have a lot of, a lot of bankruptcies. Yeah. And I think they're taking that extra point, that extra 100 bips to cover their future losses. Sure. Sure. And it's a legitimate concern. And then ultimately, the mom and pop guys, the small guys, it's going to be hard because, bankruptcy for them is a real bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you lose real assets. When you get the larger companies in my industry, at least, some of them, it's a paper write-off if they declare bankruptcy, right? It's just who's going to want to pick up leases and a bunch of seats, right? So there's AMC's, rumored to be looking at it, whether they like it or not, $6 billion write-off. Nobody's going to seize those assets. Cineplex at $2 billion. They may even, of that, they may even consider just wiping the slate clean and starting over. Nobody's going to, so I have a feeling there's a lot of companies that are going to do that 10, 15 cents on the dollar. Let's wipe out the debt. Let's start over again. But that's costing somebody money at the end of the day, right? And then you also have to remember that all of these losses that a lot of entrepreneurs have had to take, these are all losses going forward that will be offset against their revenue. So we will be paying less income tax on a corporate level because we've got all these accumulated losses that now we can use. So I think, public finances will be way harder than anticipated. And I think a part of the problem was created by this government. In fact, I believe if Harper had been there, we would have, probably suffered, but we would have weathered the storm differently.
Yeah, agreed. That's kind of where my mind's at, Vincenzo. And you touched on a lot of things there. The small to medium business insolvencies, it's a real thing. And I won't dwell on it too much longer, but I speculate. You mentioned the capital gains exemption. I think it's on the table. I mean, what is it, right? We throw the word unprecedented around this year like it's the most frequent word when it comes to government's reaction to this. But that goes both directions, right? They're going to react on the end of, when things recover, they'll have to make that cash back. And again, I think unprecedented will be the word. Everything's on the table from capital gains exemptions, et cetera. Okay, but what I want to go to next is consumer trends, because with some of your businesses anyways, you're very consumer facing, right? And I love the stories of you starting in the cinema at 4 years old, picking up popcorn kernels and hustling and then building this empire, moving forward. But I'm curious, when it comes to consumer trends that you're watching, Vincenzo, that have changed as a result, all our behaviors had to change. What consumer trends will we keep? And what consumer trends that we've adopted during this pandemic will we be very quickly to let go of once we can?
Yeah, so I think that, there was an announcement yesterday, I think it was, from the CEO of Disney. And I always love when when these CEOs wrap themselves up in I like to say in their country's flag and believe that what's happening is because they're doing it for the people, right? So one of the trends in my business is that everybody believes that, movies will no longer just be in theaters. They'll be all over the place on all these platforms, right? So I laughed and I said today at the BNN, I said, I guess, it was the people demanding for another streaming platform, another $10 a month to pay, right? Because it's not enough to have paying 2 of them or 3 of them. We got to pay 5 of them, so come on. I go, let's be honest here. The truth of the matter is, I think people will take from these last 12 months what they liked, which is the convenience of certain behaviors. Like, it's okay to hang around with your kids. It's okay to hang around with your family. It's okay to do things outside of the house. I don't think people are going to continue being home confined as they are. I think that's just insane. I think humanity in itself just says that that's not what we're going to do. I think it's going to be a 1920s roaring 20s. I think, Great Gatsby events will occur. I think people will rush back to clubs. I think they'll rush back to restaurants. If Florida is any indication, people will not want to stay home. So I think TV sales will start dwindling away. I think people will forget about renovating their homes and for that, because people want to just now have an experience. Online, I think will switch a little. We'll just pivot in the sense that I've been saying this for a while. While the incremental values may flatten out or still, rise, I think what you're gonna get is online shopping will be left to the convenience items. So I'm buying a laptop, right? So I'll go on Apple and I'll buy my laptop. I don't have to touch and feel the laptop. That's not important. But when it's going to come to fashion trends, so, contrary to Lane Merrifield on Dragon's Den, who said that we're not going back to wearing suits, Jim and I totally disagreed with him. I think we're all going to go back to dressing up again and feeling a certain sense of pride in fixing ourselves up and so forth. I think the home, work at home trend, that's going to dwindle away very quickly. I'm already hearing that banks have called everybody and said, look, June 1st, you're all back in the office. We don't care. It is what it is. We may go at 3 days a week first or on a rotation, 3 days, then 2 a day, and then eventually you'll be back to work. The truth of the matter is the first 3 months of the pandemic, I got a financing done in 3 weeks. 12 months later, a much smaller purchase, much smaller financing is taking about 2.5 months. Because now the lawyer, everybody's now on this sedentary way of working. A lot of people need to realize that the average person doesn't have a home office. Yeah. The average person has a kitchen table 100%. And they're working on a kitchen table. Yeah. And if you've got two partners working, who's going out on the balcony and having the private conversation with their client so the other client doesn't, and so forth. And if you got kids, now it becomes a living nightmare because now, the summer and so forth. So there are going to be some jobs, that I think graphic designers and those kind of people may, but I see it in my office. Everybody wanted to come back because everybody felt that they were disconnected from the group, from the team, from being able to produce. I think brick and mortar is going to come back. I think it's going to be about an experiential thing. I think everybody's going to want to go touch, feel, just reconnect with people. And as I've told enough public health experts who know very little about movie theaters, by the way, going to the movies is probably the best social distancing activity you can do, because if you think about it, you're in a 400-seat auditorium. You're on average about 200 people anyway. You don't necessarily have to say hi to anybody. You laugh with everybody. You can cry with them. You can do whatever you want, but you don't have to exchange handshakes. You don't have to hug. You don't have to do anything. And so a lot of them said, you're right, actually. It is the most antisocial social thing that you're doing. You're sitting with 400 people or 200 people. You're laughing. You've got their vibe, but without interchanging with them. I think, the last thing to open will be clubs and bars. But when they open, I think I may even go do a few visits just to remember what it was like. I think it's very important. And I think all of those businesses will boom. My only concern is will the boom be enough to offset the added weight or costs associated to this indebtedness that we've had to go. That's my only real concern. But I think on average, things will get back to about 75 to 80% back to normality as we knew it. Look, there's going to be germaphobes and there's going to be a lot of people that will be impacted by what's going on. I think I think the whole mask business is going to disappear. So I'm not understanding why some governments are doing 10-year deals, buying quantities of masks as if we're going to be in this for the next 10 years. But I think, one of the things that we have to do as a society is remember at the next elections, we're not voting for a politician during peacetime. We're voting for a person who can handle a crisis, who can handle a war. So let's choose the guy who can handle the war. Somebody who's not going to panic, somebody who's not going to get worried, somebody who's not going to forget that public health should have its independence and humanity does exist by itself.
Yeah, I'm with you. And completely aligned. I think that, my main takeaway from the last 11, 12 months has been the importance of the human experience, and not just from a social, like from a mental health standpoint, from an enjoyment of life standpoint. We're social creatures, don't let the suit and tie fool you. Like, we're animals first, and we're social animals, and we need that and we crave that. And I think it's very vitally important. And I feel like that's been emphasized in, what's the average COVID symptom? Depression.
Yeah,
like,
but you're right. I mean, look, I was a big mental health advocate with my wife since 2008. Okay. And if there's one positive thing I can tell you about COVID-19 is that everybody knows. If they don't know it firsthand because they've lived it, they've seen somebody in their family live a mental health issue, anxiety levels, depression. And I think a lot of people, while in denial, a lot of people are starting to realize that it's not always about money, but man, does it help when the money can pay for the hospitals and it can pay for the care and it can pay for everything that's gone wrong nowadays in the last 12 months. But I think it's very important that people remember that economic health, mental health, and physical health are all intertwined. We can't isolate and forget mental health. It is a serious factor, and I think that some of our kids, have and will be impacted. One of the things I insisted on doing when we reopened the theaters in July of last year is we had to wear, the staff had to wear procedural masks, those baby blue masks.
Yeah.
And I insisted on putting a nylon printed mask on top of it. And when public health came to visit, they said, why are you double masking? Like, there's no need for it. I said, no, but it's not about the double mask. It's about, I don't want kids coming to a theater and thinking it's an emergency room.
Right.
Like, I got to give them something else to think of than just this whole panic mode, this whole type of thing, right? And I think it's very important that people realize there's an impact on everybody. And the biggest impact is, people tell me, oh, are we ever going to shake hands again? I says, well, I don't know. Do you really want to have a date in your living room? He says, well, what do you mean? Well, I mean, your 15-year-old kid, when he's going to go on his first date, you really want it to be in your living room. Oh, I guess you have a point. And then people seem to forget, right? I mean, this is an experiment everybody should try, and then they should tell me if I'm wrong or not. We have been so overly exposed right now to in-home entertainment. When I tell my kids every Saturday we have a movie night, so I tell them 7:00, everybody's on the couch, we're watching this movie together as a family. I start looking for a movie at 6:00 because it's so complicated, so long. There's so much content out there, but none of them appeals to everybody.
Right.
I mean, I'm over Netflixed. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, my wife wastes an hour and a half trying to find the show we want to watch. Oh, no, this is no good. And the experience isn't the same, because part of the reason why you go to the movies or why you go to a restaurant isn't about the money, right? I mean, I said this on a TV show in Montreal in 2012. I said to Tout le monde en parle. They asked me if the problem with movie theater attendance dropping was not the fact that everybody had home theater. So I laughed and I said, "Do you have a kitchen at home?" And the guy says, "Yeah." Has it stopped you from going out 3 to 4 days a week to the restaurant? No. Okay, there you go. You can have a big TV at home. You can have all the content you want. The fact of the matter is, you want to meet people, right? We're not all married. We're not all in relationships. Some of us are single, and we're remaining single for a longer period of time. We're going to need that experience. We're going to need that human contact. And it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be a peak, and then it's going to be a leveling off.
Yeah.
But I'm just hoping the peak is there long enough to allow enough people to pay back enough substantial part of this additional debt so that we can get on to building new theaters, building new buildings, trying to imagine Hudson Yards, in New York that opened about a year before. And then, that piece of real estate, it's all about the experience. And now everything's closed. Yeah. Everything's shut down for a year, right? It's very hard to carry, but, I guess we'll get through. I mean, look, if the United States of America, if I want to, if I can only give a piece of hope to everybody is this. If for about 10 months, we had a president that seemed to be in total denial of the impact of what COVID-19 would do to the economy or to the people, it's pretty impressive that in about a month's time, a new organization managed to get enough vaccines to make the U.S. the 6th most vaccinated country in the world, right? Which pretty much tells me that part of the message that President Trump was trying to deliver was more of a non-panicky message while his team was still working. I got to be a believer that Biden didn't just, click his finger and all of these vaccines appeared. I have to believe that, the team was there and it was as much as it was an aggressive, a lot of bitterness transition, there was a transition and everybody was thinking about it. I'm a little sad we didn't do that well on the vaccine front, but ultimately it's not about the vaccine. I think it's just about, I think the biggest impact will be the mental health going forward. I think it'll take us longer to get out of that than it will to get out of the physical issues of COVID.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it's the most important part of this whole scenario. Okay, now I want to talk to Vincenzo, the investor, to wrap it up here. What's catching your eye right now, industry-wide? Are there any sectors, industries that you're especially bullish or optimistic on and looking for opportunities right now?
So I think, I think the food retail space is one I wanted to get in earlier. I did, and now I'm doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down.
Interesting.
And that's as more of a direct investor, right? So not necessarily a market invest, but more of a direct person invest. Yeah. I'm still, on a market level, I'm still very bullish on oil. A lot of people, for some reason, because of the environmental discussions around the world, because of Tesla, they believe, oil is over. I think people don't realize that gasoline consumption is a small part of oil value. A lot of people don't realize that, foam is made out of oil. Even the procedural masks need petroleum in their making, right? So the oil for me is a big part. We did buy a lot in the real estate business. Mostly shopping centers, because we actually believe that that space is going to come back because everybody will reopen. And everybody will start paying rent again. And so we bought at values that people weren't paying rent, right? Those NOIs were reflective of the last 12 months. And now, we know that the light's at the end of the tunnel for that. We're making a play for, a Guzzo gaming site. Not in the gambling space, but in the gaming, as in, esport gaming and stuff like that. We did launch a streaming platform. We still believe that, there's not enough movies reaching people, but not all movies should be going through theaters. The U.S. produces 400 movies a year. 80 of them make it to movie theaters, right? So the other 320 should be seen somewhere. And we think we have a perfect audience because we can market to our own customers who will go, online and continue. For example, we also have European movies. We have French movies. There's about 300 French movies made a year. Quebec used to have a big part of the theater market for those movies. It dwindled away. I think with the streaming platform, we can bring that back. Right. So I'm still very interested in the hotel space. I think, the whole resort space will come back as well. For those, that are still in doubt to that, just remember that, a few days after 9/11, we were never flying again. Yeah. We were never going to move. We were never. And all of a sudden, What is it? I think 2002, 3, and 4 were some of the record years for traveling, and normality came back, right? So any worries about getting back to normality, I always have to bring back the fact that the human brain is made in a way that we have an extremely developed talent of being able to repress negative things. And if you think about it, we couldn't exist as humans if we didn't have that ability to repress stuff. And that's what's made humanity so resilient. You know what I mean? If you were to look at some of the horrors that society has gone through, you'd say, how do you guys even live with yourselves, right? But it's that ability to forget and repress. So I think, where I don't think will be, I think there's going to be a reanalysis done in certain tech plays. So for example, Uber, as much as Uber seems to have saved the restaurant industry, I think 30% is a lot. And I think, a lot of provinces have already, legislated it down to maximum 20. And that's not a good thing when the government's starting to come in and legislate what you can charge as a fee. Yeah. But what's interesting about that is I'm sure there's somebody who's going to come out at 15 and another guy's going to come out at 10. And then eventually it's going to get to a point where it just doesn't make sense, right? I think that what's also going to happen is a lot of investors are going to start looking at things the way I look at them or the way Jim Tree Living does, which is the old school way, which is what's your EBITDA? What's the burn rate? Well, what are you really building? And I think that some of the exaggerated values are eventually going to dwindle away, especially when it comes to a subscription model. If there's dollars to the subscription, fine. But only because you have 1 billion followers. Well, if you can't quantify that into real sales, well, why are you worth what you think you're worth, right? I always said it, I think I said it a few years ago, but I said that I didn't think Netflix would exist in 5 years from now the way we know it today. And everybody said to me, like, you're crazy. And I said, well, guys, if they don't make money 5 years ago, they didn't make any money. Today, as the content's being pulled from them, they're now being forced to invest even more money in content creation. Mm-hmm. But they're also now having Disney Plus. There's Paramount who's coming up with their Plus. HBO has stepped up their game. So all of a sudden, Netflix is being eaten away so that, so we're going to have to go back to some logical sense of accounting when it comes to evaluating these companies. And so that's going to change. But for now, I'm sticking to what I call the old school, investments, the real estate. Everybody's got to eat, right? So, the food space, entertainment's going to be big, like I said, for the next few years. Let's see how it transforms. A lot of people don't realize that the movie theater space goes through what it's going through right now on a regular basis every 7 to 10 years. Every generational change, we're always late on adapting the content, and therefore, we're catching up. So, the best example I can give you is for people who believe that that superhero movies are a thing of the 2010 and after. Right. Sorry, guys. We had Batman and we had Superman movies in the 80s and in the 90s. Okay, so it's just a question that the storytelling changes, but a love story remains a love story. It's how you say it, right? So the best example I can give you is when James Cameron told me that Titanic and Avatar were the same movie. And I said, you're kidding me, right? What do you mean? Like, I'm not getting. And I sat down with him and it was really a big eye opener for me because it was the same movie in the sense it's a love story, forbidden worlds. So one's a class struggle, poor and rich. Here it's, a made up world somewhere, so it's just a way of telling the same story to a different clientele. My 10-year-old daughter is not me at 10 years old. We're two different people, right? So if I showed my kids The Godfather, they'd say, why are we watching this boring movie, right? But for me, when I watched it, I thought it was so powerful of a movie. Yeah. So, we watched, my wife and I watched Love Story, and she looked at it and I can't even believe this movie finished like this. This is what do you mean? Movies don't finish like this. And that's what, right? Movies today finish always with some form of a happy ending. In love story, the girl dies. The love story ends. It's right. So the storytelling's changing. Yeah. But your sure bets are still your sure bets. I mean, oil is still, for me, a big part of our lives. And I don't think we'll ever forget that. And tech's a big part of our lives as well. But, I think it's the valuation of tech that will change in the future.
Interesting. Okay. Look, Vincenzo, thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming on.